Cyclone Jude, our next major storm threat, and it's back to Mozambique on tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for March 9th. So, 2 new tropical cyclones have formed since our last bulletin, and Alfred has died. The king is gone, and it is now moving inland over Queensland in eastern Australia. But the new threat emerging is Jude, which is appearing off the coast of Madagascar and now heading towards Mozambique, where it's likely to rapidly intensify. It's 84 days until the Atlantic hurricane season begins, and it's looking pretty quiet across the view there. A few areas, little systems of cloud, a significant one off the coast of Spain and Portugal there as well, right up towards the northeast. In the Eastern Pacific, it's generally a quiet picture with 68 days until the hurricane season begins. A frontal system to the northeast of Hawaii, slowly getting closer to California, may influence the weather there soon. But nothing else. In the Western Pacific, quite a bit of activity around the southern parts of the Philippines and the northern part of Borneo. Some disturbed weather mainly, heavy rainfall, thunderstorms in that region, but nothing expected to develop into any kind of system. However, that can't be said for the North Indian Ocean now, because we've got a 20% area of interest that we've now given in the very low latitudes, around 3 degrees north there, west of Sumatra, Indonesia, and gradually going to be moving west-northwestwards towards Sri Lanka over the next few days. In the southwest Indian Ocean, of course, this is where the activity is now. Storm number 19 and 20 of the Southern Hemisphere season now. There they are, Jude being the big threat here. Rapid intensification could ensue at any time, but Ivone is actually the stronger of the storms at the minute at 50 miles per hour. And in Australia, there is Alfred and that ridiculous stalling and track that it's done, and it was just never going away, and it still is not, still dropping some locally heavy rainfall over that area around the Sunshine Coast and a little bit north of there. But our main feature then is now Jude. It is 102 kilometers from Vilamatsa in Madagascar, 112 from Ambatalafia, 423 from Lumbo in Mozambique, 431 from Nacala, and 509 from Angoche. Most of those places in Mozambique, just mentioned there, are under likely cyclone warnings. Those are unofficial warnings that we've given. Areas that we expect will receive tropical storm force winds in the next 48 hours, extending quite far towards the west as well. This system has a big potential to intensify quickly, depending on how it does. Very warm sea surface temperatures under it. Here's the latest satellite imagery of the storm from EU Met View. So far, moving westwards, just off the northwestern tip of Madagascar there. Interesting complexion on that imagery there, with the tight core near the centre, with convection blowing up on its northern side primarily, but further towards the west, that secondary, a much larger burst, which is already making its way across to Mozambique, where the weather will already be starting to change there as we get into the early hours of Sunday morning. But obviously looking pretty good as we look at this. It's got, as I said, a tight core. I think it's going to have real mileage here and its potential to rapidly intensify, although it doesn't have that much time. That's where it's going to be a difficult one to forecast in terms of how much it can actually get before it actually makes landfall there near Nacala in Mozambique. It's probably got about 24 hours, maybe a little bit less depending on its movement speed, but looking at those latest frames there, it is wrapping up really nicely. Southern side a little bit bare on those late frames, but I think once it clears Madagascar, it will get itself going a lot better, and of course that really high amounts of energy from the sea surface temperature. Now this is the other storm, Ivone. You can see it's got some decent convection over its centre right now. Still not looking the best in terms of tropical cyclones, but ASCAP passes earlier recorded wind speeds of 50 miles per hour, which puts it stronger than Jude, at least for the time being, although it is not expected to get that much stronger. Earlier model runs actually had it being a very strong storm, although they've really backed off in more recent runs and now only forecasting a tropical storm. Well, this is the massive giant mess that's been left behind after Cyclone Alfred. Clearly no longer a tropical cyclone and very little left of it. A lot of low cloud, but really in terms of convective tops, just a little bit going on further north there. But I would say the center, if it has one still, I don't think it does, is probably over the Sunshine Coast right now. Radar showing that rainfall continuing in a few spots too, with that big burst much further north from where the storm's center is. The Brisbane area getting persistent but light rain. Now this is the east coast of the United States looking out over the Atlantic. A few small severe thunderstorms across Texas right now actually. The eastern Pacific generally pretty quiet. A few little areas of high cloud mainly. Very little in the way of storms. And in the western Pacific, as mentioned in the opener, through that channel there from the southernmost part of Mindanao towards Borneo is where those storms are. And here's the North Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal, where we have that area of interest there as well. Not much going on with the convection, but ASCAT found that it has almost a rotation already. And this is a wider shot of the Mozambique Channel region where we can see this burgeoning storm Jude looking much better in those latest frames. This is the very latest there on the infrared, showing some decent cloud tops and actually wrapping up on that southern side. Wide shot of the Australian region, Ivone on the far left there, looking very disorganised, and of course Alfred on the right, which looks very little more than a smattering of clouds. South Pacific, a few thunderstorms out there as well, north and northeast of Fiji and Samoa, but in general looking quiet. So the Atlantic sea surface temperatures are starting to pick back up slowly but surely as we are obviously well into March now, into the Gulf of Mexico or America, depending on which one you want to use. It's starting to get warmer over there in the loop current. In the Western Pacific, across that region, we have got increasing sea surface temperatures, 28 degrees plus around the Philippines on either side. Southwest Indian Ocean, of course, where Jude is right now, temperatures are 29 to 30 degrees Celsius, possibly a little bit higher in a few spots near the Comoros and towards the Seychelles. In the Australian region, extremely warm off the coast of Western Australia. That's probably the hottest point right now still, even after Cyclone Zelia the other week. And off the top end there in the Gulf of Carpentaria looking good too. Still a glitch there off Queensland. It's not as hot as that. That big red blob isn't actually there. SSTs are marginal. Compared to average across the regions here, you can see that in general it is above average in most of the areas that matter in the southern hemisphere, where Jude is around 1, maybe 2 degrees above average, and for Ivone it's near average, if not slightly below actually, and obviously Alfred has left a trail of destruction in terms of those sea surface temperature anomalies, much cooler now. But there's still plenty of energy and ocean heat content here in the Western Pacific ahead of this upcoming season. Quite a bit, especially the southwest of Guam, watching out that area there. Eastern Pacific even getting a little spot or two as well this early on in the year, which I think is quite surprising. The South Pacific, obviously a big gap left by Alfred, but elsewhere it's looking pretty good around Vanuatu, north of Fiji and near Samoa. So any systems there could really take advantage, and don't forget the South Pacific doesn't really shut down until April. Sometimes you can see some strong storms even. Computer models, the GFS over the next 5 days, you can clearly see that big blow up for Cyclone Jude happens very quickly and certainly believable in terms of what happens there. Probably borderline category 3 at landfall right there, and it does it in record time. Landfall is delayed a little bit actually. It's probably afternoon hours of Monday, looking at that, which is later than what the official forecast calls for. So that's a big discrepancy there. Massive eye at the end when it emerges off Mozambique back into the channel. Australian region, blink and you miss it. What was left of Alfred there, and elsewhere across the region, not too much going on. The system tries to become a tropical cyclone there near Tonga, but fails ultimately. The GFS was actually more confident on that one previously, although none of the other models have fallen in line with that yet, and that's why we haven't issued any chances for that one. We could still see an extra 1 to 200 millimeters of rainfall for parts of south of Brisbane in Queensland. Now, looking at rainfall expectations for Mozambique, very high amounts as well from this developing cyclone. If it reaches its full potential, you can see here rainfall amounts could easily exceed 400 millimeters in those pink areas near the island of Mozambique and the Nacala region when it makes landfall. Over the next 7 days, 450 millimeters there indicated on the model, but extending down to this, you can see its whole line, its track, moving through there, emerging east of Beira, still producing 300 millimeters of rain where it exits. Looking at the longer range then, watching both of those storms, of course Ivone won't get much love, I don't think. It's going to be pretty much ignored compared to what happens with Jude, which according to GFS stalls. And of course we remember this one with a couple of other storms in the past, so very difficult to predict, and GFS seems to favour this stalling motion a lot. I would say it's less likely to turn left based on what we've seen from other storms recently, but there it is, a second phase as a strong cyclone possible in that later period towards day 10. Scan the barcode and that will take you through to the Forster Team merch store where you can take a look at all our items. And because of the upcoming cyclones, we've delayed our tropical weather bulletin stream-a-thon. We're starting it now on Monday at 12 PM UTC, fingers crossed. Well, in the silly range, day 10 to 16, we can take a look at what else happens with this storm. It continues southeastwards. Really reminds me of Hyundai actually in some regards there, and then gets swept down, way down to the abyss. Not too much else to talk about as we watch that one. There is nothing else active in the very long range, apart from possibly a little signal in the southern part of the South China Sea between Borneo and Vietnam, which we're not showing, but a small chance, very small chance of development. Well, what happened on this day? Another very beautiful storm. It was Cyclone Kirsty out over the South Indian Ocean, viewed from one of the, I don't know which satellite it would have been back then, but obviously the Japanese satellite, looking out towards the Indian Ocean from that perspective. Looking out east near Australia though, Cyclone Lindsay was making landfall during this day as well. A brief category 3 peak with 100 knot winds before making landfall on the northern end of 80 Mile Beach and weakening very quickly after it moved inland. On this day in that incredible year, 1985, Lindsay was 29s, would you believe? High numbers. Of course, this year we're up to 24, I think, right now, or even 25. Andrea is the first name in the Atlantic, though, this year, which is still at 0. The Eastern Pacific, it will be Alvin, and in the Central Pacific, of course, it's Iona. 20 storms now in 2025. In the Western Pacific, Wu-Tip is the first name on the list there. In the North Indian Ocean, it will be Shakti. So we've seen 2 storms enter the fray very quickly, both getting a Southwest Indian Ocean name. In the Australian region, though, the next name now is Courtney. In the Southwest Indian Ocean, it's Kanto. And in the South Pacific, it's still Tam. That's it from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin.
Become an ultimate fan today.